I'm Shannon Moody with Kentucky Youth Advocates. I'm our Chief Officer of Policy and Strategy. I'm also joined by a couple of my colleagues here that you'll hear from today as well. We're really looking forward to the conversation. I think we can go ahead and lay out kind of what this looked like and what you all can expect over the next 40 minutes or so. Again, I'm Shannon Moody with Kentucky Youth Advocates. Really grateful to have you all on with us today. We are having, we're doing this a little bit different than we have in previous years, but you all can give us feedback on this experiment and let us know how you like it. As you all know, with the legislative session happening, our legislators, especially the chairs of our committees, are quite busy, and it is nearly impossible to get them on at the same time to a legislator conversation. So we decided, in order for advocates to hear from folks about the perspectives in this event today of the chairs of the Families and Children Committee, we actually ended up pre-recording conversations with our two chairs, the House chair and the Senate chair, and asked them questions based on what we thought you all would be interested in hearing. So we will be showing a video of the first Senator Danny Carroll, who is the chair of the Families and Children Committee on the Senate side. And then you'll also be hearing from Representative Samara Heavrin, who is the chair on the House side of the Families and Children Committee. And then we will get an opportunity to hear from a young adult who is part of our True Up Peer Network and also very new hire to Kentucky Youth Advocates. And then we will open it up for questions. So without further ado, I will look to my colleague, Mara Powell, to go ahead and get the video going. And we'll check back in a couple of minutes once it's done. Today, we get the honor of having a conversation with our chair of the Senate Families and Children Committee. And we are hosting a series of these events over Children's Advocacy Week to create an opportunity for advocates to hear directly from legislators who are making big changes in the lives of kids and families. I know that for many of you who know Senator Carroll, you know that he has been a longstanding champion for kids in the state of Kentucky, I think since 2015. Senator Carroll, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about where you represent and a little background on you?
Okay, I'd be happy to. I'm Danny Carroll. I'm the state senator from the 2nd District, and I have Carlisle, Ballard, Marshall, McCracken, and the most recent county added to my district is Livingston. I am a retired police officer for the last, coming up on 14 years. I've been the president and CEO of Eastern Seals West Kentucky. And most of you know that what we do there, the programs that we have are child-based and adult-based, adults with developmental disabilities. We have inclusive child care. We have a medically fragile early childhood education center. We do therapies at our center. We just opened up a brand new ABA center for those on the kids on the spectrum, and pretty excited about that. And we serve well over 1,000 people within our organization. So pretty proud of the growth that we've had. And my interest in children is from being with them every day and watching the progress that they make and really understanding the importance of what we do and what quality childcare, quality services, the difference that makes not only in the kids' lives but the families' lives through the relationships that we build with families, being able to provide them with resources, referrals. So that kind of helps me to motivate me, to guide me in legislation and really look at issues that we want to address in the Families and Children's Committee, based on what I see day to day. So it's really a good connection that helps in a lot of different ways through my work here in Frankfort.
Yeah, so you've spent basically your entire career in some capacity keeping kids safe, keeping kids connected to services, making sure that they are taken care of and have what they need.
It has been, and while I was a police officer, I was a DARE officer, so I had the opportunity to spend some time in a classroom and really get to see things from that perspective, and just a very rewarding experience, a very rewarding program. And I still, have kids, or not kids anymore, they're grown men and women that come up to me that you don't remember me, but you were my dare officer. And so that stuff's really cool when that happens. And that's what it's all about. And, my philosophy is that every decision that we make in Frankfurt, we need to be thinking about our kids when we make that decision, because it's going to be their world at some point, and the decisions we make, it's going to impact that, and we need to consider that, and that doesn't always happen, and it's very disappointing, and uh, and and I know we'll get into this, but the budget, the houses budget that just came out, I can't hide that I'm a little disappointed by the lack of investment in early childhood education. And, I hope we can get something going here in the Senate, working with Dr. Vanover and some other folks, trying to get a package together here on some of the programs that hopefully we can continue on and make that investment. And we can talk about this a little bit later on, but there's a lot that I have to say about what I feel like we're missing in the legislature when it comes to early childhood education.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to hearing it. And I know our advocates who will be tuning in will be grateful to hear from your perspective. I know that at KYA, we really appreciate the philosophy that you hold and making sure that decisions that are made in Frankfurt keep kids in mind. And I'm really glad that the person who's sitting as the chair of the Families and Children Committee has that philosophy. And that committee encompasses a lot of different items, right? It's a very broad swath of a lot of, a lot of the hard things that kids and families and adults face when it comes to, the child welfare system, when it comes to childcare. You all cover in senior citizen aging, disabilities, the rape crisis centers, domestic violence shelters. It is broad. And I know that you mentioned childcare. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you prioritize what gets heard in that committee in the short amount of time that you all have to actually meet.
Well, we really try to focus on current issues, struggles that we're having, but yet as we do that, kind of keeping a broader picture in mind, and kind of observing and following what's going on in the state in all the areas that we cover within the committee. As far as legislation, it's been a little bit of a struggle to try to separate various pieces of legislation or ideas for legislation from the Health Services Committee. So, we're really not seeing a lot of bills being assigned for the session yet, but we're still young into this, and there are many issues that we need to dive into and look at, and so there's plenty to keep us busy and plenty of issues. For this session, it's been such a focus on the early childhood education issue, and issues within DJJ and the Cabinet for Health and Family Services for those children that are committed. Children within CHFS that are sleeping in offices in various locations throughout the state. And so those are the two primary topics for this session that I have been focusing on as far as legislation on my part. And, I've had a lot of meetings with Secretary Friedlander, Secretary Harvey, and trying to come up with a plan for mentally ill juveniles. That's really the priority group right now, and we're not there. We've got some work to do on that, and the work we've done, I think things are happening now. It's going to improve that situation. I think we're going to get more beds throughout the state at various levels of care for juveniles that are either DJJ or Cabinet for Health and Family Services kids. In a lot of cases, same kids, and so that's kind of the approach that we take with it. But We've made some progress, but for the most acute mentally ill kids, violent kids, we were working on some legislation and had several meetings on that yesterday, and hopefully we're going to be able to provide a facility for these kids that is based on treatment rather than incarceration. And today, from what I understand, we still have some kids that are in juvenile detention centers throughout this state that are mentally ill that really do not need to be there, and they're not getting the treatment that they need and that we must give them. And so we're gonna work on providing a facility that does that with a focus on mental health and get serious about this and take care of these issues. The DJJ system with detentions, it's all a disaster right now, and we've got to rebuild that system and make sure that we're providing a proper environment for these kids, and that we're providing a safe environment for them and the staff that are within the detention facility. So that's been a lot, and that's taken up a lot of time stemming from last year when we started this work. And it was about this time of year that we started all of that, and we still have some work to do. So continue with that, and then on the child care side of it, do you want to go ahead and get into that some?
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you brought up the juvenile justice pieces and that you all are continuing to work on that because we know that that is a process. And especially with all of your background and experience in these different realms, understanding that treating mental health looks different than incarcerating and being developmentally appropriate in that process is really critical. So we appreciate all of your work in that space. And like you said, the session is still young. We're about a fifth of the way through. I think today's day 12. So let's dig into the childcare pieces. I really want to hear from you about your hopes around what may be improved upon within the House budget, or where you think we could see some movement.
Well, I think a lot of what we miss as a legislature, and we tend to get tunnel vision and the words childcare, and I still use that term a lot. We've got to get away from that as a state and the way we think. It's early childhood education, and you look at the various issues within our state. If we had a universal, a mixed delivery system where it's public, private, if we had that in place and we invested in that, and the more kids that we're able to get in early childhood education that are in a structured environment, uh, think about the things that we can impact with that. Think about child abuse issues. And I say that because it's almost weekly that I get a call where a staff member has noticed something on a child, and we look at it. And so there are relationships built with families where you can provide resources, provide referrals for those families. So I think we can impact our numbers on child abuse as a benefit for a big investment in early childhood education. So, and I don't think we think about that all the time. We know about the workforce issues, and I fear, and I truly believe that if we do not do something more, much more substantial than what the House did, we're going to be facing what we faced back during the pandemic, and we're going to start seeing some centers closing. What we have been doing is working, and I see that every day. We at our center, we have been fully staffed off and on for the last few months. One will come, one will go, but it's worked. And we provide a decent pay, we provide step raises, we're able to do benefits, so we're stabilized in that. Our staff, they're using the child care assistance benefit that we receive. That's helped to provide stability. They're using the scholarships to get their CDA, to get an associate's degree. So all of those things are working, and uh, it's been very successful. When we look at workforce, I mean, we've seen our state basically shut down when childcare closed, and what's going to happen when these centers start dropping? It is an economic development issue, and So is there really any other facet of what we do in the state that affects so many different areas in a way that we can have such a significant impact on so many different areas? You look at, and I mentioned this in committee the other day, you look at our scores in education when kids get into primary and we're behind other states. And that seems to have always been the case. And we may make a little ground, but are we making any substantial ground on catching up with the higher performing states? And I don't, we're not. And really the only area that we haven't invested in and we haven't explored as something that's going to have a significant impact on the levels that our kids attain as they mature through the school system and the way they perform and wanting them to perform at higher levels, it's early childhood education. We all know the science of it with the forming of the brain, and I think it's 85% by age 5. And so we know that when kids get to kindergarten, the kids that have been in early childhood education, they perform better. We also know that by third grade, that kind of levels out. Well, why does that happen? I believe it's because the teachers have to spend more time with the other kids to get them caught up. So imagine that if every kid going into kindergarten had at least been through a couple years of pre-K at a quality center. Imagine where those kindergarten teachers could start. Imagine the progress. Imagine how that's going to carry on as they get in first, second, third, fourth, on up through high school, college. Is that the answer to our problems and our scores and the performance of our kids, our education attainment levels? Uh, I think it is, and I think it's the one area that we just really haven't taken very seriously because it's childcare, and it's more than childcare. I saw childcare when I came in 13, 14 years ago, and I have watched it evolve into early childhood education. The difference is daylight and dark in how the structure of a quality center, curriculums, the collaborations often with the school system. So I really think that's a key too to education. I think if we start very young and we look at a universal system for pre-K and we invest in it, I think there are going to be dividends in so many different areas that's going to make this state better. And to ignore that, I think is being negligent of our duties as legislators. And I don't know what the House is missing with this, and I don't know how you can miss it. It's been in the media, and it seems to be just an overall consensus from this state that child care, early childhood education is an issue that needs to be addressed. And I don't think anyone disagrees with that, but the House didn't do that. And so we have some work to do, and we are going to put together a package. And we may not be able to get what we're asking, but my hope is that we get a substantial investment to continue some of these programs that I know are working. And I have to compliment the cabinet. And the only thing I don't like about all these programs is they weren't my idea. And Dr. Vanover, she is awesome, and she knows what she's talking about. She knows early childhood education and the idea and putting these programs forward, the success they've had, and we've got to continue that, and we've got to make a step above to ensure that we're growing early childhood education throughout the state. That's got to be a priority, and demand for childcare is not the issue, even though, I know that we need to invest in that. The supply is the problem. We do not have enough supply to care for the kids that we've got now. And you can go to any quality center and they have a significant waiting list. And, those are families that oftentimes their parents are not going to be able to work because of that. And we need the workforce. So to me, all this is just common sense. And if you look at it that way, there is no better investment we can make, no better return that we can get in so many different areas than early childhood education.
I really appreciate how you talked about it as a means of it's a protective factor, right? To keep kids safe from
Absolutely.
harm. It keeps families in the workforce, parents in the workforce. It's a key part of our state's infrastructure,
Yes.
right? So I'm really grateful that we've got your brain and then Dr. Vanover's brain thinking about how to continue to push into spaces where we have or an early childhood education continuum that provides that care, and then also that the other educational components of that, so that we have kids who are ready to enter school and then are flourishing when they are there. I want to touch back on the idea that childcare is this protective factor for families, right? It creates an early childhood education as a protective factor because it creates a lot of opportunities for families to learn from the teachers in those systems, to go to work and to support their family financially and reduce that financial stress. Are there other issues related to child abuse prevention or the child welfare system that you anticipate the committee will talk about? I know you had mentioned, some of the issues with kids sleeping on floors in DCBS offices. Do you see any priorities coming out of that in particular, or budget investments to
Well,
target those?
yeah, I think as far as that end of it, yes, that's probably where we're going to look at as far as the investments, just the kids that are in the system to do that. And I think there are issues on reporting the structure within the cabinet. I think sometimes there are some shortfalls there. I can't, I get reports all the time that where somebody at a school or a child care facility or a childhood education facility, see, I do that too. I've got to stop that. But they try to report something and they're not able to get through. And so and a lot of that has to do with the staffing issues within DCPS. And, I spoke with Secretary Friedlander a couple of days ago, and as far as social workers, we have actually doing pretty well on the numbers. I think they are fully staffed, and they are asking for more slots. I know that was in the House budget, and that's awesome. And we need that because then they can start focusing on quality rather than just getting by day to day. And that's really an aspect of it that we need from beginning to end in the process, from the reporting process. I don't like the regionalized reporting. I like, as a community, being able to call our local DCBS if there's an issue, because oftentimes they're going to be familiar with the family, with the child, and so there's a better understanding of the situation when that happens, and when you're talking to someone across the other side of the state, I think sometimes maybe the severity of what you're reporting may not really hit, and but I know they do the best they can, and I know staffing issues has been a substantial problem, but that's part of it, and we just need to make sure that within that area, when there is suspected child abuse, when there are issues within the family, that we have the resources to address those issues. So that's something that, as a part of the overall mission or goal of this committee, that we do need to be looking at as a next step. But it's the child care, the issues of kids that are committed to the cabinet DJJ. That just has to be the priority right now. And there are other issues with our foster care system, adoptions. I mean, you name it. Of the other things that we cover, there's adult protection services, support for dependents, kinship care. We may be making an investment in that session. So a lot of different issues that step by step we're going to have to approach. And I don't like just touching on a little bit on all the issues. I would rather focus on a few and have a significant impact. I think that's the only way we're going to get anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes sense. Taking a really deep dive approach into fixing smaller, well, more narrow facets of the
Mm,
system. And then ideally that will have some ripple effects as well, right?
agreed.
What you talked
Agreed.
about. I know that we saw in the House budget some investments in foster care reimbursements, relative caregiver reimbursements, or kinship, as you had mentioned. Um, if you have advice for advocates who are interested in lifting up that early childhood education continuum, making that known that that's a priority of theirs, what can they do, or what can other advocates do to help support the cause? What would you recommend folks do to be a part of continuing to work on that piece?
I think one of the problems we have is the various advocacy groups have different plans. And, we need to get united behind one plan and we need to push that. And that's going to be a problem because one group may be asking for a huge amount of money and the next one may be kind of doing it on the small end and cutting back. And so we just need to get behind particular plan. And I hope that what we are working on and that we can get something that everyone, all the advocacy groups can get behind. And together, I mean, there are enough groups that are very loud and very uh, trying to find the word I'm looking for here, but are very passionate about this issue. But we can only be so effective if we're separate. But if we join together and we're pushing for the same programs, the same outcomes, then I think we could be more effective. And my hope is that we're going to have something out soon that it will be, it'll be a compromise in some areas, but perhaps it's something that we can all get behind and move forward.
Well, I appreciate that insight, and I'm really glad to hear that um, we think we can get to a place where it needs to be. And I would love to see more advocates continue to collaborate around, just getting on the same page and singing from the same songbook, right? So, Senator Carroll, you have been so generous with your time and your expertise. We really, really appreciate you speaking with us this morning. And I hope that the rest of your session is successful and also doesn't generate a whole lot of stress for you. So
Oh,
hang in there. And we
yeah,
really,
that's
really
not
appreciate
possible.
the,
It's always stressful.
yeah. Well, then maybe you'll get a nice break afterwards, but hang in there, and we appreciate all the work you do.
And I appreciate what you all do and all the advocates out there. It does make a difference. And again, the more we work together, the more effective we can be. And with KYA, you all are always very helpful in the early childhood education arena. Dr. Vanover, she is the go-to person for
Mhm.
this state, and we don't realize how blessed we are as a state to have her expertise. And I rely on that heavily, and it's proven. She has good ideas that worked, and when you don't see Kentucky being the model for much of anything, and in this arena we are, and states are
Mhm.
coming to us and looking at what we're doing, and we're charting maps to a better future for our kids, and that's very crucial. So I thank you all for everything that you do, and it was a pleasure to be here this morning.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks.
Representative Heavrin, we really appreciate you being here today with us. We know that you being a chair of a committee is a lot, and really appreciate the time you're spending to take with us today. I'd really like to start with just getting a sense from you what you feel are the major priorities of the committee this session, because it covers a whole lot, right?
It does. It does. And thanks so much for having me, Shannon. I appreciate all that KY does to help move Kentucky families and children forward. It's a budget session, so things get a little crazy. And so, as you know, families and children started last year. The committees broke apart, and we started last year. And so, really, I took last year in the interim to educate members on big issues going on in Kentucky. And a big part of that's childcare. We talked about foster care, anything that families and children are dealing with. And really, as I plan what we're going to talk about in the committee, it really is what are issues that are going around, what are issues that are happening in Kentucky that people talk about around their, their dinner or breakfast table. And so, last year you saw legislation that did recovery housing. We talked about different types of homes for people, an array of issues that affect our families in Kentucky. But this year, you're going to see some childcare coming out. Part of that is the budget and what does that look like for childcare in Kentucky. You're going to see some legislation on, really, it's a resolution on psychotropics and foster care and what we can do better about that. Because I think my big thing, Shannon, is I want to make sure that we are. We're having my dog Rosie is here. She's a golden retriever. She hates when I'm on Zooms. Let me give her a little treat real quick. Um, a big thing I want to make sure is we're getting this data. And so you're also going to see a resolution come out of my committee on sexual abuse in foster care, whether that be, in state's care or residential care, making sure that we've got the numbers. Because I think one thing, Shannon, is I want to make sure that we actually know what's going, this is such a big committee, we can't make big changes all at once. And so making sure that when we do make changes, we've got the data to back it up, that it's actually a problem here in Kentucky.
Senator Carroll had mentioned that because of the just broad kind of spectrum of work that you'll do, I think he tends to approach it as like he goes deep on a couple of items and then really tries to drill in. And it sounds like that's what you all are doing this session. You really want to drill in, learn more, and then tackle some of the kind of most pressing issues.
Yes. Shannon, it's with this committee, I feel like sometimes when things are on fire, that's what gets brought up first. But we went many years with it not having a full-time committee on this.
Yeah.
And so it's playing catch up. And so making sure that when something does come up, we highlight it and start having the conversation. And I think it's already working. This during the interim, we had a lot of great conversations about psychiatric residential treatment facilities and talking about no eject no reject, basically, if groups are getting state dollars, should they really be kicking out kids, and having conversations. So even if it's not something legislatively that you all see, it's really strong conversations that are actually having results.
Yeah, I know that during the interim, you all brought several different groups to the table and then followed back up with those groups, including the Cabinet for Health and Family Services and those residential facilities to kind of see the progress. It seems like you dove in really fast and like have gotten a ton of information under your belt already. It seems like you're a bit of a researcher, and it sounds like you're also a big fan of getting that data. So can you talk a little bit about the paid family leave bill that you have filed? Because that's obviously really focused on supporting families in the front end. And I'm really interested to hear what you aim to do with that this year.
Yeah. So this is actually a product of a 2-year conversation of a bipartisan stakeholder group of trying to figure out how we bring paid family leave to Kentucky. What does that look like in a conservative majority? And how do we get it passed? And so, that was kind of the number one thing is, okay, how do we get this passed? But also do good. And so what this bill
Mhm.
does, it's actually in COIL model legislation, which is the National Council of Insurance Legislators. But what it does is it opens up the market for paid family leave insurance in Kentucky. And so it's going to take a few years for us to get really good data, but allows for employers to purchase that and then to offer that as a product to their employees without them having, one of the big things I heard, Shannon, is first off, it's no mandate. It's totally up to the employer whether they do it or not. And I think that's really important because we don't want to force businesses to do things that they just can't do.
Yeah.
We still have small businesses trying just to survive from COVID. And so what can we do to uplift them? And part of the conversation with small business owners too is, well, we need more tools in our toolkit to be able to offer things for employee retention. And
Mm.
so we've really felt like this was one great option to do that. So to open up the market and to see, and so once we can get some information and data from that, we can really dive in and see, okay, what are some other things that need it? Does that look like state government? But as long as I'm in office, it's, and running the bill, it's not going to be a mandate for anybody. But it
It
opens
gives
up
you,
a conversation.
yeah, that's it gives you an opportunity to see who's jumping in to take advantage of that option. And maybe if there's um, a, a type of business where it's really trending, or if you're seeing the need and state government does make sense to be the next kind of arena. We know that access to paid family leave creates a reduction in child abuse and neglect. We also know that it helps, obviously, with that bonding, creates a lot of opportunities. And I believe that this paid family leave bill would also apply to adoptive
Uh-huh. Yeah.
parents as well. So
Yeah.
that's really exciting for folks who are planning to expand their family, regardless of what that looks like for them.
Yes. And that, ever since I got elected, Shannon, my first session, I think it finally passed my second session, but it was a bill saying that whether you were a birth parent or adoptive parent, that you deserve time off. Because I think, how do we help families? And that's a big
Mhm.
thing. I don't, a lot of times, I don't know if it's our generation or, but there's a lot of talk about infertility. And
Mm.
there's so many ways that you can have families. And so, if we can highlight that and help people that want to do that, adoption affects all of us, whether we know it or not. And
Yeah.
so how do we uplift that? But then I also think, Shannon, that like you mentioned, the bonding time is so important for families. And, kind of it changes the focus too on I want to say early education,
Mm.
if parents can bond with their child, studies show that it leads for a more nurturing relationship, but also moving the conversation of how important it is for kids 0 to 5,
Hmm.
and kind of changing the conversation on the importance of that rather than focusing on later years for students. Let's really start having conversations on what we can do for 0 to 5 year olds in Kentucky.
Yeah. It sounds like there's a lot of alignment between the House Families and Children Committee and the Senate. And that I think for working together, it seems like you have done just a phenomenal job communicating with within both chambers, and then within both parties. So I think we're really looking forward to seeing what comes out of the Families and Children Committee. Obviously, Kentucky Youth Advocates and a lot of our partners are pretty focused in on the work that you all do within that committee. So we're grateful that you all are spending the time, the energy, the focus, and then really digging in to address some of the issues that we're seeing, especially around childcare. We know that that's going to be a really big lift for the legislature this year when it comes to both budget and policy.
It is, Shannon, and I think one thing you can expect too is we're still working on it in the House, but of addressing the problem with zoning. Whenever we did a
Mm.
survey, we've been working with you all on of completing a survey for childcare owners of what's the number one issue that you all face. And it's a lot of it's local zoning. And so, I think you'll see legislation of really encouraging local governments to address that issue. Of course, no mandates, but bringing up the conversation. But I appreciate, I know our time is coming to an end soon, but I do want to thank you all. Advocates are really important because unless you all share what are some of the problems going on, we don't always know. And so this conversation of psychotropics is a big part of
Mhm.
you all, and having those conversations and having the willingness to be able to start the conversation. Because, like I said, sometimes we don't know what's happening unless you tell us, and being
Yeah.
able to have open conversations is really important. So, thank you all for always having the courage to do that.
Yeah, well, Representative Heavrin, we so appreciate you always being open to listening, and really, it's very clear that you are very interested in learning and digging in and figuring out kind of the root of the issue. So we appreciate that grit and that really laser focus around making sure that what's going to be best for kids and families is based in what is available as far as like research data, and then what you're hearing obviously from your constituents. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope that you feel better very soon, and please take care.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rep. Heavrin. All right. Before we jumped on, Representative Heavrin had let us know that she just was feeling a little under the weather. So I'm glad that she was able to still do that recording for us. I heard something from both Representative Heavrin and Senator Carroll about listening to advocates, which I think is something to continue to keep in mind. And as we listen to folks, including our young adults who have foster care experience, Representative Heavrin had mentioned the psychotropic meds. That was a result of a meeting that we had with young people with foster care experience, and her just sitting around the table and listening to their experiences in residential care. And we're really grateful for our young folks and our young adults who have foster care experience, who are willing to step in to a role that can sometimes be really uncomfortable and vulnerable, and talk about their experiences so that other young people do not have to have similar experiences to them. And I know that we have Tatum Heath, who is part of our True Up Peer Network, is also a brand new peer coach for True Up, and we're really excited to have them here. Tatum, I believe you're going to provide us some of your reflections based on what you heard.
Yes, that is what I came to do. So yeah, I have that foster care experience. I have, the parent experience side of the early childhood education experience. So I'm kind of wearing a lot of hats today when it comes to my feedback. I do want to start out by saying that I'm so very honored to have been asked to do this, because this is something that means a lot to me. And this is what I have dreamed of putting my life to do. So I'm very appreciative to be here. I was very moved by Senator Carroll and his passion for making the world that we live in better for our future generations. I think it's an important aspect to realize that that the world is not ours. We are just borrowing it from our future generations. And that we owe it to our children, grandchildren, and all the other kids out there that we don't know. We owe it to them to make their experience the best that it can possibly be. I do like the focus on just a few things at once and diving deep into those. I think that is a very good tactic when it comes to actually getting change done, rather than biting off more than you can chew. It's more effective that way when you just take a few things that you can and really, get into the nitty gritty with it. I also liked his perspective on treatment versus incarceration, because I am a social work student, and because I have experience with the justice system. I do think that it is more important to rehabilitate than to incarcerate. I think that rehabilitation enforces change and encourages anyone who has been through it to really find coping mechanisms to deal with whatever they're dealing with, because a lot of the people who are incarcerated deal with a lot of unresolved trauma and mental health issues. And so I do think that it is very important to rehabilitate those issues rather than reprimanding and incarcerating in an endless cycle. And whereas they could be rehabilitated, and become productive members of society rather than just thrown under the bus as a statistic for people to use. I found it really, really insightful that about 85% of children by age 5 perform better when receiving early childhood education. I really did not know that, but as I listened to Senator Carroll speak about it, and watching my own experience as a parent, I can like full heartedly say that that is very true. It's amazing what getting kids in there early can do for their, not only for their actual learning abilities and their education, but for their self-esteem as people. It's amazing, the difference socially and emotionally that children experience if they are given the chance to be around kids their age and sometimes kids older than them. They learn so much more in those social environments than they could ever learn just by sitting somewhere playing with blocks. I truly believe that. And I do think that it does set kids up for success. I also appreciated that Senator Carroll gave credit where credit is due to Dr. Vanover. Is that what it is? Yeah, Vanover. Okay. I really do appreciate that because it's not very often that you see people, give that proper credit. So I do appreciate that he has the maturity to do that. I am proud, or I'm very happy that we have a good number of social workers in our state. That is refreshing to hear as someone who was in foster care, because I saw my caseworker. I was in foster care from 16 till I aged out, and I saw my foster care worker maybe 3 or 4 times. And I don't want to fault anybody that shouldn't be faulted because that poor woman had a caseload that could kill a cow. So I do not blame her at all, but I'm glad to know that we're finally getting those numbers that we've so desperately needed for very, very long. I also agree with local reporting, local DCBS offices, rather than like talking to somebody halfway across the state or even halfway across the country, because I've experienced that before and there's no connection, there's no empathy with it. And I think that disconnect with it being an automated system, I think that it leaves that compassion that's so desperately needed in these services. I think that it leaves it empty, and I don't think that people are properly able to connect with one another and really sympathize with each other. It just becomes a monotonous job that people do just because they're getting paid. And so I really think that being local could potentially expand our empathy levels in this system because they are very much needed, especially for the kids, the adults, even the caseworkers. Everyone in this situation needs all the compassion that they can get. Representative Heavrin, am I saying that right? Okay, good. I liked how she talked about psychotropics, especially when it pertains to like residential treatments, because I have been in a residential treatment as a foster kid, and I was practically forced onto medications that weren't right for me, and did nothing but harm. There was no real balance. It was like, oh, here's some medicine, go to sleep. And, those caused a lot of damage that I had to work years and years and years to undo, because no matter what, psychotropics are something that you can become addicted to. They are something that you can become very, very dependent on, especially if you're given them in inappropriate situations. At least for me, they were. And so, you know, having to find other ways to balance out all those feelings that I was feeling on those medications took a while. And so I do think that that's something that really needs to be addressed and really needs to be mandated a lot more. Especially with like all of the different types of abuse that you can go through in care, including sexual abuse. You know, that is something that we really need to focus on as well, because I was an older kid when I went into foster care, but I lived in a home with multiple different young girls who would tell me stories that, you know, would just break your heart. And you know, these are things that 5, 6, 7 year olds should never go through. My younger sister is adopted and she suffered a lot of sexual abuse while in care, and so did my younger brother, and they're only 8 and 6 right now. And you know, that's something that children should never have to deal with. That is something that people who are abusing the system should not be able to get away with, but unfortunately are able to do that sometimes. And so I really do think that those are some big things that need to be looked into. You know, we should know what's going on and where these kids are and how they're doing. That is something that as us adults, you know, people who are advocates for these children, you know, that's something that I hope that we can really put our foot in and get to the bottom of in a way. So I do love everything that Senator Carroll and Representative Heavrin talked about. I do like that they are really putting their all in and, you know, putting their best foot forward to try and get these issues that we so desperately need solved. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a couple years, but I think that we're set up for success with the people that we've elected in office, because we have chosen 2 people who are dedicated to the betterment of our future and our children's lives. And I think that that's, you know, something that's very commendable of both of them.
Tatum, I think next time you should be asking the questions of the legislators based on all of that reflection and feedback. I really appreciate you clearly thinking really deeply about what they said and what that means to you based on your experience, but it also just means more broadly for young people who have experience in care, and as a parent, and the couple of hats that you are wearing. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it gives a lot for advocates to think about and take away, you know, as they continue to engage in this process. I know that we had a couple of questions in the chat that I think were responded to, and then a couple of insightful remarks from other advocates and their personal experience. I think, Theta, to your point, you know, with legislators, you know, people are people. Humans make decisions and base things off of their own personal experience, and with learning and exposure, their ideas can change, or their mind can be moved in different directions based on compelling conversation or based on things that they hear from advocates. I think a lot of times it takes persistence and it takes grace. I think that's for both advocates and legislators. I've definitely seen legislators change their mind on issues before based on conversations with other advocates, but sometimes it takes a little time, and it can be really hard to admit that maybe you were wrong about something, or maybe you were thinking about something from a very different frame that no longer aligns with your values. And I think that is for all humans. It's really hard for me to look back and say like, ooh, I may have thought about that in a way that is not as helpful to think about anymore. So I think trying as much as you can to humanize, and be persistent and be kind, and reciprocate the kindness when it's available, or when needed, be clear in that, like, what they're saying impacts you as an individual as well, because relationships are hard. I so appreciate you all being on today. I know that we were over time, so thanks for hanging on. Just as a reminder, at 3 p.m. we have a coffee break with advocates and incredible lobbyists who will be joining us to address any questions that you have, talk about experiences. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We will see you all again later, and hopefully tomorrow in person here in Frankfurt. Take care.